Ted Lasso season 3 just finished, and it was a pretty big disappointment. If you're here, I assume you've seen at least the first 2 seasons, so this is going to spoil the whole show. Season 3 went completely off the rails from the first 2 seasons. It felt so different and completely political on top of that. I think the main reason for this is because the first 2 seasons, all the characters that you care about are constantly interacting with Ted and the soccer team and with one another. And this season is literally twice as long as the first 2. This one was 12 episodes that were 45 minutes to an hour each. The first 2 seasons were 22 episodes combined that were anywhere from 25 to like 35 minutes mainly, with a couple that were like 45 minutes, like the season 2 finale. So the biggest 2 culprits for this season being mostly garbage are, one, that the characters are all completely disconnected from one another for a bulk of the season, and like I just mentioned, the political and social commentary was just nonstop in your face the entire time. So I'm going to do a quick synopsis of the main characters for each of the first 2 seasons so that you can understand what I'm saying when I say that season 3 was really disjointed. So season 1, when you look at Keely, she's dating Jamie and befriends Ted and Rebecca. So almost all of her interactions with them are at the soccer facilities or the stadium or with someone on the soccer team, and it's directly involved in the story. Rebecca is expending almost all of her energy to sabotage Ted. She befriends Keely, she's dealing with her ex Robert, but it's all about the soccer team. Obviously, Ted is mainly dealing with adjusting to life in England and figuring out soccer and learning the game and getting the team to bond. We got the little side story with Nate getting promoted from kit man to assistant. Coach Beard is always obviously around. And these are really all the key players in season 1. In season 2, it expands a little bit where you get Keely dating Roy, and he's doing his thing going from commentator and analyst to coach, but he's still largely around Ted and the team. Jamie comes back from Man City and starts his redemption arc. Nate starts his villain arc, but he's still an assistant coach, so he's around the team a lot. Sam is more part of the plot just in general because he wasn't really super involved in the first season. Then you get his stuff with the protesting the company in Nigeria, or the company that's exploiting Nigerians. And, it's a little bit annoying, but it didn't take up much screen time because the season was so short. Ted is dealing with his divorce and the team, and Rebecca and Sam start dating, which is super weird and really inappropriate. But my whole point is the first 2 seasons is the formula for them is don't be political. Let Ted tell his dumb jokes that are plays on words. Let Roy be angry. You have some nice character moments and development. But everything is really tied to the soccer team and Ted. And then it branches out from there. Season 3, you get a bunch of completely unrelated stories, and the soccer and Ted are almost an afterthought. Before I get into the story itself and why I think it was kind of broken for season 3, and I'm not going to get too much into this, but this season was way more political than the first 2. The first 2 had little comments here and there, the protest thing in season 2. This season, it's just constant. They're constantly mentioning all the far left buzzwords like patriarchy, bigots, old white men. It's just over and over and over. You have 2 plot lines that are huge portions of the screen time that are completely politically motivated and completely unrelated to the rest of the fucking story. And they tie them in at the very end to the soccer team, but 95% of these stories is its own separate thing. And these 2 are, you find out that Colin's gay, and he comes out, and they portray it as this big epic thing where you get the real tight zoom in on his face, and he has to make sure everyone's okay with it, and no one gives a shit. No one gives a shit in the show. No one gives a shit in real life. And the second plot line that I thought was just completely unnecessary, I did not give a shit about when I was watching, was Sam and his Nigerian restaurant and bitching about how England should essentially open their borders. And because he's bitching about it online, his store gets trashed, or his restaurant gets trashed. And I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be some kind of mirror to like Crystal Knocked, because the way that it looks and the way that it's framed and portrayed, that's how it felt to me. It seems like they think Western Europe, aka also America, are like a day away from reincarnating Hitler and genociding fucking everybody that's not a white guy. And this is all stemming from the fact that England's saying, look, we don't want mass amounts of refugees from other countries and other very different cultures coming unfettered into the country. I'm not going to get into my own opinions and whatever, but these two plot lines take up a huge portion of screen time and are just completely fucking unnecessary to the story. I'm going to get into the story now, but I at least wanted to mention the political stuff because it's just so overt and so frequent. It actually makes the show hard to watch. Like, even when the stuff is happening as funny, they just slip in some comment that's like, was that really necessary? And it's just nonstop. Another, I would say, political or cultural thing they did was make Keeley suddenly bisexual. And again, just completely unrelated to the main story. And to me, it seems politically motivated. All right, so for the main story, we've got all these separate plot lines. So I'm going to explain this so you can see how disconnected everything really is. So Keeley is running her own PR business. She's broken up with Roy because she's too busy with work and he's too busy with the soccer team. And her first 4 episodes are dealing with some old friend she runs into on the job. She hires her. The girl's really bad at her job, so she has to fire her. Her next 4 episodes are her dating a woman, and because of a scandal where they leak nude videos of women online, Keeley's supposed to do like a corporate apology and refuses, and her funding from her company gets pulled. And this chick breaks up with her. Then the last final couple episodes, she's kind of having a breakdown. Rebecca agrees to fund her. She reconnects with Roy, and they kind of get closure on their breakup at least because it's awkward the whole season. Well, like the 5 minutes they interact. And at the very end, it seems to me like she's back together with Roy, but the way it's done, I guess you could interpret it either way. Nate does his redemption arc this season. He picks up where he left off season 2 being a big dick. He's coaching West Ham for Rupert, and he ends up realizing that he's around a bunch of assholes. He starts dating the hostess that he liked, and eventually he quits the job as head coach and apologizes to Ted at the end of the season and gets back with the team. It's a fine arc. It took way too much time. They spent way too much time with Nate. I did not give a shit about his side story. Another side story that I already mentioned was we get all this focus on Colin, who I actually didn't even remember as part of the show until this season. And like I said, they make him gay. He's been hiding it the whole time. Trent, the journalist, is doing a book on their team this season. He's following Colin. It turns out they're both gay. And yeah, just again, completely unrelated to the team, completely unrelated to Ted. And they spend all this time on it just for you to get this, like, essentially a 5-minute payoff where the whole team is like, good for you, no one cares. Except the one guy is mad at him because he found out first. He's the team captain. I'm blanking on his name right now. But he found out first, and he gets mad at him. And the implication, he's mad at him for being gay, when really he's mad that he hid it from him the whole time. And they did something which I thought was pretty spineless. What they do is, during one of the games, they're playing like shit. And as they're leaving the field, some fan is yelling at him and cussing at him and says, you guys are playing like a bunch of fucking faggots. And they didn't even say it. They say, you guys are a bunch of fah. And then the crowd noise picks up. And then the guy that had already known about Colin being gay when no one else did loses his mind, jumps up into the stands, ends up being a whole big thing. And it's just, I just think it's cowardly. Like, if you're going to go that far to try to portray what you view as realistic homophobia, then fucking commit. This is like when they want to do a movie or a show and have like a super racist character, but they don't use any slurs about the group that they're racist against. And it's like, I don't know, I think it's cowardly. Like, if you want to talk about heavy subject matter and serious social commentary and whatever, fucking go all the way. So that's Colin's storyline. Like I said, completely unrelated to the team until like episode 8 or 9, and you get one episode of payoff. It's a complete waste of time. Sam has this whole thing about opening a Nigerian restaurant, like I mentioned, and it's just so boring. I did not give a fuck about his side story at all. And then he tweets at England's prime minister or whoever because they're not accepting the mass amounts of refugees that are fleeing their countries. So, like I said, his restaurant gets destroyed. We all this preaching about bigotry and countries shouldn't have borders and blah, 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 and no one cares. Fucking make jokes and play soccer. Rebecca hardly interacts with Ted this season at all, it feels like. She goes to a psychic pretty early on who says she's going to have a family, so she gets pissed off and leaves. And then we get like kind of a bottle episode where they're doing a friendly in Amsterdam, and she meets this guy on a boat. And at the end of the season, like at the very end, she runs into this guy when she's dropping Ted off at the airport, and his daughter, and the guy already told her he was divorced. And it's implied that they'll be a family together. Rupert has a bunch of adultery scandals, gets divorced again by the end of the season. I don't know the actor's name, but he's a good job of being a fucking asshole for the entire show. And they always dress him kind of like a Bond villain, which I think helps, his aesthetic. So Jamie has by far the best arc of the entire series. I don't really even think it's close. Season 1, he's a total narcissistic asshole. Season 2, he comes back and he's still a bit of a prick, but he's trying to be more of a team guy. And then season 3, he really develops into his own as a superstar who's a really good teammate. And in the end, he resolves the issues with his dad in a text. I'm going to get back to that in a minute because I found this frustrating the way this was done. So Ted struggles with his wife. She's dating their marriage counselor, which is complete bullshit. And there's this weird 4-episode arc where they get this guy Zava, who I think is supposed to be based off Ibrahimovic. And he's supposed to be like the superstar on the team, but really weird and hippie. But then he just suddenly retires. And that part of the story just never comes up again, which I just didn't understand. It felt like they had too much time to fill and they didn't know what to do. So they go into a rut after this guy Zava leaves. Ted has an epiphany and changes the entire system they use midway through the season. And they get it turned around. They end up dramatically beating West Ham and end up in second place. And Rebecca begs him to stay, but he goes back to America for his kid. And this is another one where it seems to me like he's getting back together with his wife, which I think is weird, but I guess you could interpret it as just he's just going back to America. To me it seemed like he was going back to his wife. My wife said she thought he was just going home to be with his kid, so make of it what you will. Roy takes over as coach with Nate and Coach Beard as his assistants, because Coach Beard marries the crazy lady Jane he's been with for the whole show. And at the end, we just get this montage of a whole bunch of shit that happens the last 15 minutes. Coach Beard marries Jane, Ted goes home, Rebecca finds a family, Jamie, Roy, and Keely are all really good friends now. Sam has his restaurant, Nate is with the hostess, and, happy now, and good endings all around for everybody except for Rupert. And the reason I find this frustrating is the season was 12 hours long, or close to it. And they spent all this time on just completely drawn out drama and separate stories. And then they just throw them all together at the end. And it's frustrating because all the stuff with Ted, Roy, and Jamie is great. The stuff with Keely on her own, Sam, and Colin, just did not give a shit about. The stuff with Rebecca was okay. But it was weird how little she interacted with the team this season, and Ted in particular. And it seems to me like you could have used all that time you wasted on garbage to really flesh some things out at the end instead of just doing a big montage. Like Jamie resolving his issues with his dad could have easily taken up, a good portion of multiple episodes because his dad was a total prick. We get a text and then in the montage you see a flash of them together and his dad's happy and he's happy. And it's like, so we spent 4 episodes on Keely dealing with some friend that she ran into and being bisexual instead of good character stuff when you already had the arcs in progress. The stuff with Rebecca I thought was really strangely done because she meets this guy in that bottle episode in Amsterdam and they have a romantic evening together but don't have sex or even learn each other's names. And then essentially we get 30 seconds in a montage and it's implied that they're just together. Again, that's another part. You easily could have had her spending time looking for him, her consulting with Ted about how frustrated she is, she missed an opportunity. And you really could have fleshed that out into a good story instead of they meet, it's really great, and then they're together. And you get nothing in between. The Sam and Colin plot lines, I don't think you needed at all. If this had been one of the previous seasons where it was 12 episodes that are half an hour long and you cut these 2 plot lines out, the show loses nothing. This is the exact type of bullshit that we see from Hollywood where it's we want applause for showing homophobia and racism. I don't know. It's just so tiresome at this point. We get it. You're all far left. Please stop ruining the fucking stories. And it's just purely political. Keely, again, easily could have been tied to the main story.
Like, I don't think she interacts with the main cast. It must be less than like 15 minutes of screen time until episode 8 or 9. Like, she's hardly around anybody. And that's another one where you easily could have had her do that shit with her friend and the lesbian or bisexual or whatever the fuck they were, and have it all tied to the team. Have them getting tied into whatever scandals and the team's involved and it affects them. You get a lot more interactions with all of them and Roy and Jamie and Ted and the people that you give a shit about. Like, I don't give a fuck about Keely and some childhood friend or Keely and some lesbian that just shows up and then rolls out after 4 episodes. It just seems like they didn't know what to do with all the extra time they got. To wrap up, this season really probably should have been the same length as the other ones, and it easily could have been. And it's too bad because, like I said, the development between Roy, where he starts training Jamie and Jamie becomes a really good player and really dedicates himself to soccer instead of, womanizing and feeding his ego, becoming a great teammate, resolving his issues with his dad. That's all really good stuff. The stuff with Ted dealing with his wife and moving on and struggling with it and struggling with missing his kid, finally getting the team turned around and playing at a high level, sort of embracing English culture and using all their terminology and stuff, is also really good. And his humor is the same as it always was. Roy realizing that he needs to stop being angry and pushing everybody away, trying to become more honest with himself, and Keely, even though it may or may not work out, that's all good stuff too. Rebecca finally comes to closure with getting over how Rupert fucked her over. She doesn't want revenge anymore and she wants to be happy on her own. And that was all good too. It was just super disconnected from the main story. Nate regretting his actions, showing some humility, essentially begging for forgiveness from Ted. Like, that part was really well done, but they did not need to spend, I would guess, probably 3 hours of screen time on Nate this season, and 2 hours and 45 minutes of it was him on his own. And it just was not worth the time spent to me. And one of the best scenes in the show, maybe in the show overall, is when Coach Beard goes to Nate's house because he's kind of the last one holding out. Because Ted wants to bring Nate back earlier on, and Coach Beard says he'll burn the stadium down if Ted does. So Coach Beard goes to Nate's house to forgive him and talks about his connection to Ted and essentially how he had destroyed his own life and everyone had abandoned him except for Ted. And then when Ted, was there for him, he robbed him, and Ted still forgave him anyway. So it's a really good, emotional scene, and like, it's a good payoff. It didn't need 3 hours of build up. This is my whole point, is there really was a lot of good stuff in the season, but they just buried it under so much other stuff to the point where I don't even know if it's rewatchable. I actually just rewatched season 1 before I recorded this, and everything on screen has a purpose and is good and moves the story and the characters and it's funny. And this season just dragged. And for me, this season's like a 4 out of 10 because they buried all of the good stuff underneath so much unnecessary shit. I'm not going to keep repeating myself, but like I said, if they had cut out Sam and Colin's plot lines, tied Keely and Rebecca's stories into the main story, I think it would have been like a 9 out of 10 season. I mean, there's some decisions I just didn't like, but that kind of stuff is subjective. Like, I wouldn't have mind seeing Ted take a big pay raise and bring his wife and son over to England and kind of stay there and that become his new life. But, having him go home and be with his kid, it's the same thing. I guess they just wanted the sadness of him leaving Rebecca, which I get, but I don't know. I would have liked it if he had stayed, now that he had finally found his place and the whole team was really united and got together and would have had a chance to win the league year after year. I mean, to sum up, I guess I've said it like 10 times at this point. The structure of the story and the politics ruined it. And it's a shame because the first 2 seasons were so tightly written and so good. And it's just a bummer. But that's all I'm going to say about this one. If you're still here, like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.